Hello and welcome to WC Moore Talks. I'm WC Moore. I'm going to be watching and commentating on presidential speeches, and I'm going to start with the Biden Afghanistan speeches.
Earlier today, I was briefed by our senior military and national security leaders on the status of the drawdown of U.S. forces and allied forces in Afghanistan. When I announced our drawdown in April, I said we would be out by September, and we're on track to meet that target. Excuse me. Our military mission in Afghanistan will conclude on August 31st. The drawdown is proceeding in a secure and orderly way, prioritizing the safety of our troops as they depart.
While you're prioritizing safety of the troops, the priority should be for the US civilians who have been sent over there, like the embassy staff and the Afghanis who've helped the US military, because they're the ones who are going to be in most danger to start off with, and the troops know that they're there to protect them, so they also know they should be the last to leave.
Our military commanders advised me that once I made the decision to end the war, we needed to move swiftly to conduct the main elements of the drawdown. And in this context, speed is safety. And
What the hell do you mean speed is safety? The quicker you go, the more likely you are to make mistakes. Do it nice and steadily and get out right.
thanks to the way in which we have managed our withdrawal, no one U.S. forces or any forces have been lost. Conducting our drawdown differently would have certainly come with an increased risk of safety to our personnel. To me, those risks were unacceptable. And there was never any doubt that our military would perform this task efficiently and with the highest level of professionalism. That's what they do. And the same is true of our NATO allies and partners who have supported, we are supporting and supporting us as well as they conclude their retrograde. I want to be clear, the U.S. military mission in Afghanistan continues through the end of August. We retain personnel and capacities in the country, and we maintain some authority, the same authority under which we've been operating for some time.
Make up your mind, is it some authority or the same authority? If it's some authority, then who is above us? If it's the same authority, then why did you even think about some authority? You need to know what you're saying here and say it straight so people know what is happening and how it's happening.
As I said in April, the United States did what we went to do in Afghanistan, to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11 and deliver justice to Osama bin Laden, and to degrade the terrorist threat to keep Afghanistan from becoming a base from which attacks could be continued against the United States. We achieved those objectives. That's why we went. We did not go to Afghanistan to nation build. And it's the right and the responsibility of Afghan people alone to decide their future and how they want to run their country.
Define nation build. You've still got troops in Germany, and that's since the 40s. You've still got troops in Japan since the 40s. Are you nation building in those places? So, what would be the issue of keeping troops in Afghanistan?
Together with our NATO allies and partners, we have trained and equipped over nearly 300,000 current serving members of the military, the Afghan National Security Force, and many beyond that who are no longer serving. Add to that hundreds of thousands more Afghan National Defense and Security Forces trained over the last 2 decades. We provided our Afghan partners with all the tools, let me emphasize, all the tools, training, equipment of any modern military. We provided advanced weaponry, and we're going to continue to provide funding and equipment, and will ensure they have the capacity to maintain their Air Force. But most critically, as I stressed in my meeting just 2 weeks ago with President Ghani and Chairman Abdullah, Afghan leaders have to come together and drive toward a future that the Afghan people want and they deserve. In our meeting, I also assured Ghani that U.S. support for the people of Afghanistan will endure. We will continue to provide civilian and humanitarian assistance, including speaking out for the rights of women and girls.
If you're giving them 100% control, which you should do, it's their country. These are Muslims, not Christians, so their um, views on women's rights are completely different to yours. So they may say they're giving women rights, but it might not be what you want. So you shouldn't demand things that you can't get.
I intend to maintain our diplomatic presence in Afghanistan, and we are coordinating closely with our international partners in order to continue to secure the international airport. And we're going to engage in a determined diplomacy to pursue peace and a peace agreement that will end this senseless violence. I've asked Secretary of State Blinken and our Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation to work vigorously with the parties in Afghanistan, as well as the regional and international stakeholders, to support a negotiated solution. To be clear, countries in the region have an essential role to play in supporting a peaceful settlement. We'll work with them, and they should help step up their efforts as well. We're going to continue to work for the release of detained Americans, including Ferrix. I want to pronounce the name correctly. I misspoke. So that he can return to his family safely.
It's good that you're thinking about Mark Ferrix, but shouldn't that have been part of the original deal with the Afghanis? Because he's been held since January 2020, and it's now July 2021. So these are things that need to be negotiated before you say, yep, we will pull out everything.
We're also going to continue to make sure that we take on the Afghan nationals who work side by side with U.S. forces, including interpreters and translators, since we're no longer going to have military there after this. We're not going to need them, and they have no jobs. We're also going to be vital to our efforts, and they've been very vital, and so their families are not exposed to danger as well. We've already dramatically accelerated the procedure time for special immigrant visas to bring them to the United States. Since I was inaugurated on January 20th, we've already approved 2,500 special immigrant visas to come to the United States.
2,500 in 6 months. And you're saying you're going to leave in just over a month. Depending who you talk to, there's between 80 and 150,000 Afghanis who help the US. If you've only got 2,500 out, what happens to the other, just say 80,000? You're not going to get them through in a month and a half if it's taking you 6 months to only do 2,500.
Up to now, fewer than half have exercised their right to do that. Half have gotten on aircraft and commercial flights and come. And the other half believe they want to stay, at least thus far. We're working.
They want to stay thus far because they're not in danger at the moment. The US is still there. But wait until the end of September and they'll be diving for the nearest planes.
Closely with Congress to change the authorization legislation so that we can streamline the process of approving those visas. And those who have stood up for the operation to physically relocate thousands of Afghans and their families before the U.S. military mission concludes, so that if they choose, they can wait safely outside of Afghanistan while their U.S. visas are being processed. The operation has identified U.S. facilities outside the continental United States, as well as in third countries, to host our Afghan allies if they so choose.
Why can't they be held inside the US? There's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people come to the border and they're allowed into the US and with the hope that they'll turn up to court. And these Afghanis have helped us. Why can't they come to the US as well? Because they will go to court.
And starting this month, we're going to begin begin relocation flights for Afghanistan SIV applicants and their families who choose to leave. We have a point person in the White House and at the State Department-led task force coordinating all of these efforts. But our message to those women and men is clear. There is a home for you in the United States if you so choose, and we will stand with you just as you stood with us. When I made the decision to end the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan, I judged that it was not in the national interest of the United States of America to continue fighting this war indefinitely. I made the decision with clear eyes, and I'm briefed daily on the battlefield updates. But for those who have argued that we should stay just 6 more months or just 1 more year, I ask them to consider the lessons of recent history. In 2011, the NATO allies and partners agreed that we would end our combat mission in 2014. In 2014, some argued 1 more year. So we kept fighting. We kept taking casualties. In 2015, the same, and on and on. Nearly 20 years of experience has shown us that the current security situation only confirms that just 1 more year of fighting Afghanistan is not a solution.
You were second in command in the United States during those times. So that was your decision, or are you just going to blame all this on Obama? And Trump was going to pull them out in his first 4 years, but the security agencies came back and said, this is a bad idea, please don't do it, and he didn't do it. You've got to follow the security and not just do what you want to do because you promised it.
But a recipe for being there indefinitely. It's up to the Afghans to make the decision about the future of their country. Others are more direct. Their argument is that we should stay with the Afghanistan indefinitely. In doing so, they point to the fact that we have not taken losses in this last year. So they claim that the cost of just maintaining the status quo is minimal. But that ignores the reality and the facts that already presented on the ground in Afghanistan when I took office. The Taliban is at its strongest militarily since 2001. The number of U.S. forces in Afghanistan had been reduced to a bare minimum. And the United States and the last administration made an agreement with the Taliban to remove all our forces by May 1 of this year. That's what I inherited. That agreement was the reason the Taliban had ceased major attacks against U.S. forces.
If that is the case, and that agreement is the reason they ceased major attacks, then why haven't they attacked at the US since May 1? Because it is now July 8th, and last time I noticed, July 8th was after May 1. So why are you still there?
If in April I had instead announced that the United States was going back on that agreement made by the last administration, the United States and allied forces would remain in Afghanistan for the foreseeable future, the Taliban would have again begun to target our forces. The status quo was not an option.
Are you scared of the Taliban? The Taliban kills American, go and kill 10 Talibanis. But I mean, that is what a superpower does. It shows how strong it is by using military.
Staying would have meant U.S. troops taking casualties, American men and women back in the middle of a civil war. And we would run the risk of having to send more troops back into Afghanistan to defend our remaining troops. Once that agreement with the Taliban had been made, staying with a bare minimum force was no longer possible. So let me ask those who want us to stay, how many thousands more Americans' daughters and sons were you willing to risk? How long would you have them stay? Already we have members of our military whose parents fought in Afghanistan 20 years ago. Would you send their children and their grandchildren as well? Would you send your own son or daughter?
If my own son or daughter signed up, then yes, I would send them. That is their choice to sign up. This is not a country which conscripts their people. So yes, I would send my son. I would send my daughter.
After 20 years, $1 trillion spent training and equipping hundreds of thousands of Afghan national security and defense forces. 2,448 Americans killed, 20,722 more wounded, and untold thousands coming home with unseen trauma to their mental health. I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan with no reasonable expectation of achieving a different outcome. The United States cannot afford to remain tethered to policies creating a response to a world as it was 20 years ago. We need to meet the threats where they are today. Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized beyond Afghanistan. So, we are repositioning our resources and adapting our counterterrorism posture to meet the threats where they are now, significantly higher in South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa.
You said there was only 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. And if that is correct, and there's about, just say there's 100,000 US troops in the military, you still have a few more troops that you can put into South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. So you can do more than one thing at a time. You can walk and chew gum. Come on.
But make no mistake, our military and intelligence leaders are confident they have the capabilities to protect the homeland and our interests from any resurgent terrorist challenge emerging or emanating from Afghanistan. We are developing a counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on any direct threats to the United States and the region and act quickly and decisively if needed.
As I've read it, Over the Horizon is using outside of US sources, and so that could be anybody, and they could be giving you targets for any reason at all. So how trustworthy is this Over the Horizon capability?
We also need to focus on shoring up America's core strengths to meet the strategic competition with China and other nations that is really going to determine our future. We have to defeat COVID-19 at home and around the world. Make sure we're better prepared for the next pandemic or biological threat. We need to establish international norms for cyberspace and the use of emerging technologies.
Companies in the US this year have been attacked through cyberspace, and you have done nothing. They're both linked to, or the two big ones were linked to people in Russia. What did you do to Russia? You have done absolutely nothing to help these people. That is your job, is to protect the people of the United States.
We need to take concerted action to fight existential threats of climate change. And we will be more formidable to our adversaries and competitors over the long run if we fight the battles of the next 20 years, not the last 20 years. Finally, I want to recognize the incredible sacrifice and dedication that the U.S. military and civilian personnel serving alongside our allies and partners have made over the last 2 decades in Afghanistan. I want to honor the significance of what they've accomplished and the great personal risk they encountered and the incredible cost to their families. Pursuing the terrorist threat through some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet, I've been almost throughout that entire country, ensuring there hasn't been another attack on the homeland from Afghanistan for the last 20 years, taking out bin Laden. I want to thank you all for your service and the dedication to the mission so many of you have given.
If you really mean that, then I'm sure the service people appreciate it. But have you considered that the reason hasn't been another attack from Afghanistan is that the US has been in Afghanistan?
And to the sacrifices that you and your families have made over the long course of this war. We'll never forget those who gave the last full measure of devotion for their country in Afghanistan, nor those whose lives have been immeasurably altered by wounds sustained in the service of their country. We're ending America's longest war, but we'll always, always honor the bravery of the American patriots who served in it. May God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
Mr. President, do you trust the Taliban, Mr. President?
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well equipped as any army in the world, and an Air Force against something like 75,000 Taliban.
First of all, how many Taliban are there? You said 75,000. Okay, 75,000 against 300,000. I'll give that to the 300,000. But there's been generations of people, Britain, Russia, America, all attacking Afghanistan, and they have survived. And they've had the greatest armies at that time. So just because the 300,000 Afghani troops have the greatest military does not mean they're good at guerrilla warfare. So it does not mean they will win.
It is not inevitable.
Do you trust the Taliban, Mr. President? Do you trust the Taliban, sir?
Is that a serious question?
It's absolutely a serious question. Do you trust the Taliban?
No, I do not.
Country to the Taliban.
No, I do not trust the Taliban.
So why are you handing the country over?
Is the U.S. responsible for the death that happened to Afghans?
What? Mr. President, will you amplify that question, please? Will you amplify your answer, please, why you don't trust the Taliban?
It's a silly question. Do I trust the Taliban? No. But I trust the capacity of the Afghan military, who is better trained, better equipped, and more competent in terms of conducting war. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. President. Given the amount of money that has been spent and the number of lives that have been lost, in your view, with making this decision, were the last 20 years worth it?
You know my record. I can tell by the way you asked the question. I opposed permanently having American forces in Afghanistan.
Don't be a politician. Answer the question. She asked if it was worth it. She didn't want to know whether you voted for it or not. That doesn't matter now. We're in there. So, was it worth it?
I argued from the beginning, as you may recall. It came to light after the administration was over, lasted our administration. No nation has ever unified Afghanistan. No nation. Empires have gone there and not done it. The focus we had, and I strongly supported, and you may remember, I physically went to Afghanistan. I was up in that pass where Osama bin Laden was allegedly escaped or out of harm's way. We went for two reasons. One, to bring Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell, as I said at the time. The second reason was to eliminate al-Qaeda's capacity to deal with more attacks in the United States from that territory. We accomplished both of those objectives, period. That's what I believed from the beginning, why we should be and why we should have gone to Afghanistan. That job had been over for some time. And that's why I believe that this is the right decision and, quite frankly, overdue.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
So what is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place. The question is, will they generate the kind of cohesion to do it?
That's basically what she asked. She didn't ask if they had the capacity to stay together. She said that the intelligence says that they won't stay together and they won't have the cohesion and they will collapse.
It's not a question of whether they have the capacity. They have the capacity. They have the forces. They have the equipment. The question is, will they do it? And I want to make clear what I made clear to Ghani, that we are not going to walk away and not sustain their ability to maintain that force. We are. We're going to also work to make sure we help them in terms of everything from food necessities and other things in the region. But there is not a conclusion that, in fact, they cannot defeat the Taliban. I believe the only way there's going to be, this is now Joe Biden, not the intelligence community, the only way there's ultimately going to be peace and security in Afghanistan is that they work out a modus vivendi with the Taliban and they make a judgment as to how they can make peace. And the likelihood there's going to be one unified government in Afghanistan controlling the whole country is highly unlikely.
Mr. President, thank you. But we have talked to your own top general in Afghanistan, General Scott Miller. He told ABC News the conditions are so concerning at this point that it could result in a civil war. So if Kabul falls to the Taliban, what will the United States do about it?
Look, you've said two things. One, that if it could result in a civil war, that's different than the Taliban succeeding, number one.
Who would the civil war be against, though? It would be the Afghani government against the Taliban, so she's kind of saying the same thing.
Number two, the question of what will be done is going to be implicated, is going to implicate the entire region as well. There's a number of countries that have a grave concern about what's going to happen in Afghanistan relative to their security. The question is, how much of a threat to the United States of America and to our allies is whatever results in terms of a government or an agreement? That's when that judgment will be made.
Mr. President, some Vietnamese veterans see echoes of their experience in this withdrawal in Afghanistan. Do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam, with some people feeling...
None whatsoever. Zero. What you had is you had entire brigades breaking through the gates of our embassy. 6, if I'm not mistaken. The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capability. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comparable. I'll go the other side. Hang on a second.
Mr. President, how serious was the corruption among the Afghanistan government to this mission failing there?
Well, first of all, the mission hasn't failed yet. There is...
What do you mean the mission hasn't failed yet? Are you expecting it to?
In Afghanistan, in all parties, there's been corruption. The question is, can there be an agreement on unity of purpose? What is the objective? For example, it started off there were going to be negotiations between the Taliban and the Afghan National Security Forces and the Afghan government. That didn't come to fruition. So the question now is, where do they go from here? That the jury is still out. But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. President, will the United States be responsible for the loss of Afghan civilian lives that could happen after the military exit?
No. It's up to the people of Afghanistan to decide on what government they want.
You have really got a short temper today. I mean, that's the second time you started shouting at these reporters. Calm down. It's their job to ask you questions.
Not us to impose the government on them. No country's ever been able to do that. Keep in mind, as a student of history, as I'm sure you are, never has Afghanistan been a united country.
Why are you assuming she's a student of history? I mean, she's a journalist and she's talking about Afghanistan, but unless you know her, why are you assuming she's a student of history?
Not in all of its history. Not in all of its history.
Mr. President, if this isn't a mission accomplished moment, what is it?
No, there's no mission accomplished.
Well done, Mr. Biden, for avoiding George Bush's dastardly mission accomplished garbage. That should never have happened, and it proved to be wrong, so well done for avoiding that.
The mission was accomplished in that we got Osama bin Laden And terrorism is not emanating from that part of the world.
In speed of safety, as you just said in your remarks, are you satisfied with the timeline of relocating Afghan nationals? Is it happening quickly enough to your satisfaction, if it may not happen until next month at the end?
Much of it's already happened. There's already been people, about 1,000 people have gotten on aircraft and come to the United States already on commercial aircraft. So as I said, there's over 2,500 people that, as from January to now, have gotten those visas, and only half decided that they wanted to leave.
I reiterate, 2,500 out of 80 to 150,000. And only half of them have said they want to leave just now because the US is still there. Wait until a few days before, and yeah, everyone will be trying to get on a plane.
The point is that I think the whole process has to be speeded up, period, in terms of being able to get these visas.
Why can't the U.S. evacuate these Afghan translators to the United States to await their visa processing, as some immigrants at the southern border have been allowed to do?
Because the law doesn't allow that to happen.
Law doesn't allow it to happen at the southern border either, which you interrupted her while she was trying to say that. But you do it. Instead of keeping them out of the country, you let them in, you spread them all over the country.
And that's why we're asking the Congress to consider changing the law. But in the meantime, we can guarantee their safety if they wish to leave by taking them to third countries, and or, while the wait is taking place, to come to and hopefully while they're waiting there, to be able to bring them back to the United States if that's what they choose to do.
I'm an Afghan woman. Any message, good message for Afghan women in future, because they have achievement, they are really concerned about their achievement.
They are very concerned with good reason. Yes. When I was in Afghanistan, I've been there a number of times. I remember being in a school outside, and by the way, the schools...
Nobody cares how many times you've been to Afghanistan. You're a politician. You go around the world like that. And it's a photo opportunity for a lot of you. But the question is, with a Muslim government coming in, are these women going to have freedom, or are they going to be back to where they were 20 years ago? Some of these young adults have only ever known freedom, and now they're going to go back to the Dark Ages?
In Afghanistan are not fundamentally unlike schools on the West Coast, where they have, you know, an area in the middle that is sort of looks like a playground, and single-story buildings connected around it. And I remember saying speaking to a group of young women, I guess they're roughly, don't hold me to this, they look like they'd be 14, 15 years old. And they're in school, and there's a tiered classroom with single light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, as I know you know. And I said, you know, the United States came here to make sure that we got this terrorist Osama bin Laden, and that terrorist didn't amass again to go after our country. And then we're going to have to leave. And the young woman said, you can't leave. You can't leave. It was heartbreaking. You can't leave. She said, I want to be a doctor.
It was heartbreaking, yet you're still happy just to walk out and leave them?
I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. If you leave, I'll never be able to be a doctor. Well, that's why we spent so much time and money training the Afghan security forces.
But what you're doing is training people who don't necessarily think the same as you to protect the people who they might not necessarily want to protect, so they won't protect them.
To do the work of defending that. If every work, well, anyway, so yes, I'm aware. I'm going to take one more question.
Mr. President, have you spoken with any Taliban officials about the withdrawal?
Mr. President,
The Taliban
explain
being in Russia today.
Mr. President, thank you. I wanted to ask, with the benefit of hindsight, you've spoken to the fact that the Taliban are sort of at their militarily strongest point that you've seen in 20 years. How do you feel personally about that with the benefit of hindsight and all of the dollars and investments and American troops that were sent there?
Relative to the training and capacity of the ANSF and the federal police, they're not even close in terms of their capacity. I was making the point The point was that here we were. The argument is, well, we could stay because no one was dying. No Americans are being shot, so why leave? Once the agreement was made by the last administration we were going to leave by May 1st, it was very clear that a Taliban that had always been a problem was even a more sophisticated problem than they were before. Not more sophisticated than the ANSF, than government, more than they were. The point being that it would have increased the prospect that they would have been able to take more lives of Americans if they decided we weren't going to go after them. That was the
Again, this is after May 1st, so why haven't they been attacking?
point I was making. Thank you all so very much.
Have you spoken with any
Thank you for watching the video. Hope you all enjoyed it.